we will start shortly. Thank you for joining today. My name is Maria. I'm very glad to welcome you to this event. We're going to be talking about Preprints 101 for authors. We have a great speaker lineup today. First, Iratxe, ASAPbio Associate Director, will start us off with an introduction to Preprints. We will then hear from Sumeet, who is a group leader at the Free University of Brussels and an ASAPbio fellow. And Sumeet will share his journey of posting preprints with bioRxiv with review comments. And we're very much looking forward to that. And finally, as a part of Europe PMC team, I myself will then present tools for preprint discovery. And we really hope you'll enjoy our talk. Please welcome Iratxe, who will now tell us why we should use preprints and how to have the best author experience when posting them.
So as Maria kindly noted, I'm Iratxe Puebla, Associate Director at ASAPbio, and I wanted to cover a little bit about the benefits of preprints for life sciences communication and share a few tips to try to make sure that when you are an author posting preprints, you have the best experience possible. For anyone who may be here today who is not familiar with ASAPbio, I just wanted to mention briefly, we are a biologist-driven non-for-profit, and we have a mission to make life sciences communication faster and more transparent. As part of our activities, we have a main focus on supporting a productive use of preprints in the life sciences. So to get started, I thought I would cover a definition of what is a preprint. And I wanted to start by saying that actually there is no consensual definition for a preprint in the community. So I'm going to offer a description that touches on quite a few of the elements of preprints, but again, bear in mind that you may hear other definitions from others. But I would define a preprint as a scholarly manuscript that is posted by the authors to a repository or platform to facilitate open and broad sharing of early work without any access limitations. And another way of describing a preprint that I'm quite fond of is this one that used by John Inglis. John Inglis is the co-founder of the Preprint service bioRxiv and medRxiv. And he has previously mentioned that a preprint is the director's cut of a manuscript, essentially a version of the paper that the authors consider accurate and ready to share with the community, knowing that it may later on undergo changes in response to feedback or peer review. Oops, sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm having some trouble here with the slides. Okay, there we go. So I wanted to highlight a few similarities and differences between preprints and journal articles. On the side of the similarities, there are quite a few things that where preprints and journal articles are very similar. They both report the scholarly work and they should incorporate all the relevant information needed to replicate that work. Both preprints and journal articles received persistent identifiers, usually in the form of a DOI. So they are permanent records that are traceable. And then again, given that they have these persistent identifiers, they can be cited as part of your own work. There are, however, some important differences between preprints and journal articles that I wanted to highlight. The first one, and the one that we may have heard about most regularly, is the fact that preprints are not peer-reviewed prior to being posted publicly. So essentially, they are non-peer-reviewed versions of the paper. Another important difference is the fact that preprints allow authors to post different versions. So they allow versioning, which means the authors can post the first version and then undertake revisions or changes and post another version of the paper, and all of those are linked on the preprint server. And then linked to this functionality around versioning, preprints provide the opportunity to actually make corrections and updates in a much easier and fluid manner than we usually see in relation to the versions of record published at a journal. So I wanted to mention the fact that you may be familiar with some of these, the fact that preprints in the life sciences have been seeing quite a bit of growth over the last 5 years, and we saw an acceleration in the adoption in 2020 in the context of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are very happy, of course, at ASAPbio to see this increased adoption, although it is useful to bear in mind that still preprints compared to journal articles constitute a minority of the literature. However, again, as you can see from this data that is from Europe PMC, there has been year-on-year adoption increase. And actually, if we look at 2021, so again, so far this year, comparing the preprint records and the journal articles index in Europe PMC, preprints now constitute 12% of the literature, which is a huge increase over the last 5 years. So I wanted to mention briefly, essentially, what are the benefits and again, what may be driving this adoption in the life sciences. One of the main benefits of preprints is the fact that they make the work available almost immediately. If you're familiar with the journal publication process, you probably know all of this, but an author would prepare the manuscript, submit to a journal. The journal may decide to consider it or not, so there may be a DAS rejection and the author needs to initiate another cycle of submission to a journal. And then once the journal decides to pursue peer review, that process can take a number of weeks, which means that what we see usually is that from the time that an author submits the manuscript to a journal and when it gets made publicly available, we see a time lapse of around several months or sometimes even years. By comparison, when posting a preprint on a preprint server, the process is usually completed in a number of days. So the author would take the manuscript, submit it to the preprint server, which will undertake some basic screening. Again, it's not peer review, but there is usually a screening process that takes 1 or just a few days. And then the paper will be publicly available, which allows, again, others to start already using the work, providing feedback to you as an author, etc. And that's a process that can take, again, take place much faster than the journal process. And it can also happen sometimes in parallel. Essentially, you can choose whether you would like to share that in parallel or before to the journal submission. But the speed of dissemination is not the only benefit that preprints provide. There are several other advantages that I wanted to highlight. The first one is that there is no publication fee for preprints. Essentially, it's a free service for authors. And there are also no subscription fees or paywalls associated with a preprint. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they allow broad and free access, which also allows greater visibility and reach for your work because you will be available to anyone with an internet connection. And actually, there has been several studies previously, such as the one mentioned there, that have looked at the association between the presence of a preprint and the attention that the journal article receives on publication, and they have consistently shown that for those journal articles that have an associated prior preprint record, the journal publication will actually receive more attention and citations. So again, there is this possibility for greater reach and impact for your work. Preprints are also indexed by a number of the literature search tools available out there, Europe PMC, Google Scholar, and I know Maria is going to speak more about Europe PMC in a bit. So, but then, again, this adds to the visibility and accessibility of your research. And again, as I mentioned, they provide an opportunity to receive community feedback from others who may access your work, again, even as you are progressing with it prior to journal submission. And that can help you improve your paper, again, should you wish to consider it for journal submission later or independently of that. So in the next section, I thought I could mention a few tips or steps that it is relevant to bear in mind if you're thinking of posting a preprint, again, so to try to make your experience as a preprint author as positive as possible. The first step, and this is very important as for any preparation of manuscript that you may be undertaking, in the same manner as you would discuss your paper with co-authors. If you are thinking about submitting it to a journal, do discuss with your co-authors if you are exploring the option of posting your paper as a preprint, and make sure that everyone is on board with, again, the submission to a preprint server. You may experience situations where you're working with collaborators who may be perhaps less aware around preprints or may have questions or concerns. And to help with those conversations, I would advise you to check our ASAPbio Preprint Resource Center, which is available on our website. We provide a number of resources around preprints there, such as infographics. We have a comprehensive preprint FAQ, which is now translated to several languages. And we also provide links to funder, journal, and institutional policies that are supportive of preprints. Another important step as you are thinking about posting your work as a preprint is obviously to choose a preprint server. There are now over 50 preprint servers available that cover biomedical sciences. So obviously there are a number of options available to you for posting, and there may be different factors that are driving your decision, but I would say it's important to consider obviously the disciplinary scope, make sure that that aligns to your line of research. Another important consideration may be whether the preprint server is covered by indexing services. Again, if they are covered, this will increase the visibility and accessibility of your paper once posted. And another relevant item to bear in mind may be whether you have received funding from funding agencies that provide specific recommendations around the preprint servers they suggest. We have a preprint server directory on the ASAPbio website, which provides a number of characteristics for different servers, which you can filter according to your needs. So I would suggest that you take a look again as you are considering which preprint server to submit your paper to. Then obviously you should move on to preparing your preprint. Another important step in the process, especially if you are thinking of submitting the paper later for journal publication, is to check what are the policies for your target journal or journals around preprint deposition. The majority of biomedical journals will accept preprints, but some of them provide some nuance in the editorial policy around which preprint servers they accept, and also around which version of the paper they may accept. Some of them accept any version of the paper up to journal acceptance, but some others specify that they will only accept papers when the version of the manuscript that has been deposited as a preprint is that prior or at the time of journal submission and before peer review. It is also important to bear in mind which license you will apply to the preprint. There are a number of options available. Some servers will give you a range of license options. Some others will only post the preprints under a Creative Commons CC BY license. So it is important to bear that in mind. And again, we have some resources on our ASAPbio website that can give you more information around license options to help you make a decision. Another thing I wanted to mention briefly is that if you are considering filing a patent application for your research, a preprint will count as a public disclosure in the same manner as a journal publication. So it is important to get some advice from your technology transfer office before you complete the preprint deposition. And then once you have covered all of that, you're ready to post your preprint. So again, as I mentioned, there will be some screening process, but it should be available within a day or a few days. And it can be really useful again to increase the visibility of your work, to share your preprint in social media or share it with collaborators or other colleagues who may be interested. And with that, I think I've covered the majority, but I wanted to mention again, remind you about the resources on our website, and also mention briefly that ASAPbio runs a community of researchers and others with an interest in preprint. So if you would like to hear more, you're more than welcome to join us in the ASAPbio community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Iratxe. This was absolutely brilliant introduction, and I hope that all our participants are now better prepared when deciding on whether to post a preprint and how to do it in the best possible way. We now can welcome our second panelist, Sumeet Pal Singh, and his talk about the author journey of posting preprints. Sumeet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Iratxe, for this wonderful introduction to preprint. And so my talk is focused more on posting, of course, and publishing the preprint, but from the point of view of how they can actually help authors and researchers in their careers. So the way things are, at this moment, publishing is the goal and preprints are a means towards reaching that goal. So the stamp of peer review still remains necessary. And I'll give some examples for this. So one of which is, if you look at the application for EMBO Young Investigator Program, this is for early career researchers. And the deadline is 4 years since starting your own group. So if you are a group leader, and they do allow preprints to be part of the initial application. But at the time of the interview, and the initial application is around March, but at the time of interview in November, at least one of your senior author papers should be accepted. It should either be in a peer review journal or at least have acceptance from the editor. So publishing remains the goal of via a preprint. But what the advantage of having a preprint, as Iratxe has said, is that it gives you immediate visibility. That's one of the biggest advantages. And so the rule of thumb that we have is that if you want to get your paper out in a particular calendar year, it should be submitted by April. So if it's not kind of submitted till April, it will not be out in the same calendar year. And you can see that it's a long process if everything goes smoothly. And this includes that you submit to a journal in which it goes to review, where the reviews are promising and encouraging, and then it goes and gets published there. Now, of course, it's an iterative process, and the more revisions and the more journal submissions you have, the more longer the process becomes. And this is where preprints can help a lot. So this is just a cartoon showing that, it is a painful process, a lengthy process to get your paper peer reviewed. And two of the kind of difficult parts is, first thing is the judgment that the editor makes, whether or not to send your paper out to peer review. Many times, and it's a frustrating process, many times the paper just gets sent back to you with very little justification on why it was not even peer reviewed. And the second one, which often is very painful for authors, is to get reviews back, but the reviewers are biased based on the impact factor of the journal. So, if the journal has high impact factor, then the review process is a bit more lengthier, a bit more painful than, let's say, a lower impact factor journal. And this could just be a very arbitrary thing, right? So this kind of arbitrary decisions hurt authors a lot. So one of the new, let's say, pipeline that helps with these two painful processes is provided by Review Commons, which is nicely integrated with one of the preprint servers, which is bioRxiv. And the advantages with this process gives is that you put your preprint on bioRxiv, so it's immediately accessible to the world. And then you do not submit it to a journal for a review. Review Commons will actually provide you reviews based on your preprint. So that's why it's a journal independent peer review process. So the reviewers do not know where the paper will actually be submitted to. So that's why their reviews are not dependent on the impact factor of the journal. And once you get your reviews, you make a response to them. This response will include what experiments you will do in future to satisfy the reviewers. You don't have to do the experiments. You have to just list them in the response. And the interesting thing is that your manuscript, your study, along with the peer review and your response gets submitted to a journal or multiple journals. So now the editor is not making his or her decision based on just the manuscript itself, but on the review that your manuscript received, as well as the response that you gave to the reviewers. So the editor has access to all of this package together, right? So this is just an example that we did. So it was actually the first senior author paper from my group. And here is the preprint on bioRxiv. And you can see that these were the reviews that we received from Review Commons. Now, the reviewers are blind to where this manuscript will finally end up being published or being submitted to. And this is actually our response to the reviewers, which only lists what experiments we will do to satisfy them. We did not do the experiment. And then this whole package can be submitted via Review Commons to one of these 17 participating journals. Hopefully it increases in future, but currently these are the 17 choices that you have. We were lucky to have our paper published in one of these 17, but on the website for Review Commons, they also suggest that if these are not your choices, they can actually provide you the reviews to be taken to another website, to another journal, if the journal is happy to take the reviews from them. And just to give you an example, when we did give our package, the package including the manuscript, reviews, and response to journals, they made their decision based on the manuscript and the reviews received for them. So now the editor is not just looking at manuscript in isolation. And maybe, I mean, the editors at many of these journals are very good and they do an amazing job, but maybe they are not an expert in your field and therefore they are not the perfect judge, right? So, but now they are already seeing people, they are already seeing the response of people who have judged your paper, the peer reviews. Right? And just to give you an idea of how the whole timeline went. So this is the timeline of the paper from being posted to bioRxiv to being actually online on EMBO reports. And you can see that it, as Iratxe has said, it took 1 day from posting to bioRxiv to being available to the world. Within 24 hours it was. And then it took 5 days for it to be sent out to peer review via Review Commons. So within 1 week, the study was available to the world and out for peer review. Then once we received the peer review, our next version, which had some improvement based on the reviews, based on the peer reviews, as well as our response, went online in 1 day. So a new version with improvements could be posted online very quickly, as well as it took around about 21 days, so 3 weeks, for it to be considered in 2 different journals. And for us to get a positive response from one of these journals that they will consider it. It does not mean accept it. What it means is that if we are able to satisfactorily do the experiments that we have proposed in the revision, then the journal will consider it for further processing. It goes back to peer reviews, the final version, and then based on the reviews, the new reviews, it's either accepted or rejected. So, but these were the timelines which were super fast and kind of the least painful that I've had in my career. And so just to show you that actually it does not decrease the time of publication of a peer review publication significantly. It still took 291 days for a completed manuscript to come online as a peer reviewed publication. And therefore you might ask, well, what is the advantage of this process over a traditional peer review system? And one of the advantages that I had personally was that it helped me to show an increased productivity. And what do I mean? So if you look at for postdoctoral application, if you want to apply to EMBO postdoctoral fellowship, they will consider preprints. So if you have preprints on your CV, it's completely fine. They will consider that as part of your productivity. What they will not consider is if you list papers that are either in preparation or which are in review, but they are not accessible to the community. So putting your papers out or your study out on preprint helps you to demonstrate an increased productivity. A second example that was very important to me, because this is where I used it a lot. So for ERC starting grant, it's a highly competitive grant available to starting researchers. And to show early achievements, they ask you to list 5 publications without any authorship from your PhD supervisor. So only the work from postdoc. That means that any work that has been done during PhD is not really considered as an early achievement track record. Now, if you do some basic math, so it's a 7-year deadline to apply to starting grant after PhD. None of your work from PhD will be considered. It takes around your first year, things are slow, and your last year, your manuscript will be in review. So let's say if you do not post any preprint, that essentially means that you need 1 publication per year to show a good early achievement track record. Now, if you were to put up a preprint, which is this asterisk here, number 27, that they do consider preprints as part of early achievement track record, essentially you can increase your productivity by 1 year, right? So the 1 year where your manuscripts are in reviews, you can preprint them and show your increased productivity. And therefore, the one thing that it helped me personally preprinting my study is that preprints are much better than your submitted papers, and of course, much better than in preparation to show, to demonstrate your productivity. So the take-home message is that preprints could be of immense help in career advancement. And as Iratxe has said, on ASAPbio website, you will find ways to talk to your author, to your co-authors on whether you want to preprint your study or not. But I would also mention that if you are a PhD or a postdoc who is trying to find a mentor, I would suggest that you talk to them about their opinion on preprinting. Because at the end of the day, if preprinting can help you with your career, then it would be good to know what their opinion is, and if they would be open to preprinting your work if it helps you with your CV and everything. And with that, I would like to thank you all for attending, and I'll take questions later on.
Thank you, Sumeet. That was a great talk, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. Please keep them to the chat for this at this point, and we'll come back to them at the end. So for the last point of today, I am very happy to present preprint discovery tools that Europe PMC provides for those who are interested in preprints. I've put our contact details on the slide, and please feel free to chase up with your comments or questions after the webinar as well. So just to introduce ourselves, Europe PMC is a literature database. It is a database of scientific publications and other documents. We're developed by EMBL-EBI and based in Kingston, UK. Europe PMC is the dedicated open access repository of 33 international science funders. Sumeet mentioned ERC in his talk, and that's one of our funders. All of them require that the publications resulting from the work they support is made available in Europe PMC. We are also part of PubMed Central International Archive Network and partnered with PMC USA, exchanging full text publications that are made available through both PMC and Europe PMC. I've mentioned that we provide access to different types of biomedical and other life sciences research papers. And in fact, we make available peer-reviewed journal publications from several different databases, such as PubMed or Agricola, but also life science preprints, which will be the focus of this talk, as well as other documents like patents, PhD thesis, guidelines, and so on. In Europe PMC, all content is available as abstracts, but for a subset of papers, we also provide full text, which is searchable via Europe PMC. I'll make a point on why that is important in my talk. Now, where we don't have full text, we provide links to free legal full text copies elsewhere via our partnership with Unpaywall. In our work, we focus on supporting publishing innovation, and preprints is one such emerging trend in scholarly communication that we are proud to support. We work to ensure reproducible science by linking publications with underlying research data, and I'll show how that happens for preprints as well. We strive to enable data-driven discovery with the help of text mining and machine learning technologies. In terms of preprints, we have begun indexing them in 2018, and you've seen this graph in Iratxe's slides. Currently, there are over 300,000 preprints from 20 different platforms available, searchable in Europe PMC alongside peer-reviewed publications. Now, as all content in Europe PMC, preprints are also part of a larger network of resources that we link together. Where available, preprints will be linked to a published journal article. They'll be part of an open citation network, so you can explore citation connections between different preprints and peer-reviewed articles. Preprints will be linked to author identifiers such as ORCIDs, enabling an easier and more streamlined author search. We will also link preprints to data in deposition and curated databases so that you can examine the underlying data sets yourself. Where possible, we will provide a link from the preprint to an open community peer review so that you can view responses from other researchers in the field. And finally, we will link preprints with other useful resources. And I'll show how that works in a moment. I also want to mention our COVID-19 full text preprints initiative, which began in July 2020. With support from several of our funders, we began searching the full text of COVID-19 related preprints and adding them as a full text available from Europe PMC itself. And so that increases their discoverability on the website and also provides a very useful corpus for those who want to develop new tools based on the COVID-19 preprints themselves. So in today's talk, I just wanted to briefly show you a few tools that we provide when searching, reading, citing preprints. So to start with search, one thing that I want to make clear is that when you use Europe PMC, you search through all of the content. So this means that if you've posted a preprint, whoever is searching for the relevant topics will find your research, whether it is preprinted or not. Preprints are labeled in search results so that it is clear and they can be distinguished from journal published articles. We also offer a filter that allows you to search in preprints specifically, and you can additionally select only those preprints that have been later published in a journal if that's something that you're looking for. We provide a way to search for preprints that come from a specific server. So if you're, for example, interested in bioRxiv preprints specifically, or any of the other 20 platforms that we index, then that is there's a possible way to do this. Again, as all other content, preprints are searchable using all of our advanced search techniques. We describe that elsewhere, so I've put a link to another training that we do if you are an advanced literature search user. But essentially what it means is you can combine search for preprints with keyword search using Boolean operators, selecting particular authors, searching in title, or even in article sections. And that's something that I wanted to highlight separately. So one thing to mention here is that Europe PMC differs from several other search engines that mostly index abstracts, in that we also look through the full text of the records that we have. And that means that if your keyword is mentioned somewhere in results, but not in the abstract, those records will still come up in your search results. So they will be more discoverable and you'll get further hits for the search terms that you use. Now, this is particularly relevant for the search that's limited to article sections. So if you wanted to specifically look for preprints that mention transcriptomics, but they mention it in methods section more specifically, not in introduction or results or discussion, then you can do so. Now, this will of course work for the records where we have full text, and so currently it's limited to COVID-19 related preprints, but we do have plans for expanding the full text project to other preprint types. Now, looking at preprints in Europe PMC, you will have the same record like you would for a peer-reviewed journal publication. You will see the abstract and the full text if available. you will see the orange notification clearly telling you that it is a preprint. If you wanted to see whether it is published, there will be a link to the journal published article within that notification. And if you jump to the journal published article, reciprocally, there will be a link to preprint. So for instance, for some cases where a full text is not available from the publisher website, you could go ahead and read the preprint instead. As a way to quickly scan the preprint, we pull out figures in a separate gallery so you can quickly go through the results. And if you're interested to learn more about the data that's presented in the figure, you could always use the link to jump and show it in full text. Now, another way to quickly scan through the article is by using our annotation, highlight annotations tool. Annotations are essentially biological concepts and entities, for example, methods or gene protein names, chemicals, organisms, you name it. And those entities we identify in the text using text mining and machine learning techniques. Now, we provide a list of the entities that are found within a paper, and you can select the ones that are of particular interest to you, and they'll be highlighted in the text. So by combining all of the different entities you're interested in, this could be used as a upgraded Control F item, and you can also navigate between them. But what is more important is that each record is then linked to the relevant record in a database. So for example, for cases where people have cited data accession, you can then go via the link to the database that hosts it. So in this case, for example, a transcript is available from Ensemble, and you can quickly jump to it in the text and view the record in Ensemble to examine the evidence yourself. Speaking of accessing such underlying data, Europe PMC also summarizes all of the relevant data links in a separate automatically generated section. Data behind the article will contain links to data that's deposited into biological databases. So here in this preprint, accessions for electron microscopy databank are cited, as well as protein structures available from the protein databank. You can also find links to data from knowledge bases that have curated a preprint to create a data record on their side. So here are two examples for preprints. One, a preprint that has been picked up by curators from the polygenic score catalog because it mentions polygenic score related data. And another from biomodels database where curators have looked at the models that have been presented in the paper and then tried to reproduce them and written about their summary findings. You can also specifically search for preprints that have such linked data, and you can select which database or which data type interests you the most. Now, currently, few databases curate preprints, but of course, many preprints will share the data citations that they have in the text to where the data behind the preprint is deposited. If you're interested in finding data behind research article, we've done a different training that might answer some questions you have. And so if you're interested, you can find the link on this slide. Finally, and quite useful to the previous talk we've heard from Sumeet, you can find preprints that have open peer reviews available from communities that do this. And we have quite a few partners that provide us with link to reviews. They're on this slide. And we're working with another site which is doing work around aggregating peer reviews from different platforms, including these and several more. And so hopefully you will be able to examine the reviews that have been written by other researchers in the field if you don't have the expertise to address the findings on your own. As we collaborate with other partners, all of the links are open. None of them is paywalled, so you can always openly read whatever links are provided from Europe PMC records. You can also search for preprints that have linked reviews using the advanced search, and I've put the link on the slide below. I've talked about preprint citations, and so this is sort of useful twofold. Sometimes authors want to know how many times their preprint has been cited, and we do provide a graph. So this particular preprint has been cited 53 times over the years. What's quite interesting is you can also look at the count of smart citations that we receive from CiteAI. And so CiteAI, they analyze the context of the reference, and they classify these as supporting, mentioning, and contrasting. And so you can have a look at which papers agree with your findings and which papers might find something different in their work. We also provide a list of the citing articles. So if you need to extend your bibliography by looking at who else has cited this preprint, you can easily do that in the citations and impact section. Finally, you can sort your results by time cited. And so if you're looking for some established research in the field, even with preprints, you can do that by finding the most cited preprints for the topic that you're interested in. You can also use the Get Citation tool on each preprint page to quickly save a preprint and cite it in your own reference. So you can cite each version of the preprint separately in case one version differs from another, with an addition of an experiment, for example, that you're specifically referring to. This part of the talk is just looking at claiming preprints to your ORCID. So ORCID is a unique identifier for academic authors, and it essentially allows you to build your online portfolio of the research work that you've done, be it data, funding, or publications. Europe PMC provides an option to claim a preprint to your ORCID from the preprint page, and also a tool to claim several works in bulk. The reason it's useful is so we automatically generate such graphs for all authors that have an ORCID and works in Europe PMC. So this is a profile for Alex Bateman, who works at EBI, and the graph will include preprints as well as publications, and will sum the count of citations for both in the graph. It will also display open access versus non-open access works. It will provide a list of publications that you've claimed to your ORCID, so you can easily look at your bibliography and the citation that it has received and compile your publication list if necessary. We use ORCID in another way, and that is by providing suggested authors feature. There is another EMBL-EBI working at NASA, and if anyone is searching for the works that I've personally authored during my time as a researcher, they're most likely having to scroll through hundreds of papers on physics. And so to kind of circumvent that, Europe PMC does matching behind the curtain, and we will suggest top authors that match your search, that have an ORCID, so you could filter to see publications specifically authored by them. With that, I'm at the end of my talk on tools, and thank you very much for your attention on all three talks. I can see we have a few questions in the chat. You are free to post them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to ask any questions. So we have a question from Guillermo. He's asking if there's a way in review comments to add a contact to be considered as a pool of reviewers. Does Iratxe or Sumeet, can you respond to that?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned that there is a contact email address where you can contact Review Commons. Again, that review is organized by an editor, so as usual, as you would, it's a very similar process to a journal. It's just that it's journal agnostic. As Sumeet had explained, but essentially whether you will be contacted or not will depend on the editor selection and the manuscript, etc. But if you are interested, I would encourage you to email Review Commons on that contact address and express your interest, and they should be able to put you at least in the potential pool of reviewer list.
Thanks. I hope that answers your question. So another question is from Anne. How does Europe PMC link preprints to final peer-reviewed versions of a paper after publication? So we do that based on a matching. We look at the authors list and at the publication title, allowing for some differences. But of course, it's not perfect. If somebody has completely changed the title, and on top of that, they've decided to change the authors displayed on the preprint, that will not work. But we are quite successful, and as you've seen, almost a third of all preprints is linked to a journal published version. And also, does the preprint entry get replaced by the final paper entry via the replication of the DOI, or would you continue to see both? So we hide different preprint versions in the search results. So if somebody would post a preprint on bioRxiv, and then updated to version 2, and then updated to version 3, and so on. In Europe PMC, you would find the final version, and that's where you would be directed, although we do search through all of them. But we keep both published paper and preprints in the search results currently. We are continuing to accept user feedback. So if you have any particular suggestions as to how you personally find it helpful to work, we would be very happy to review those. Also, a follow-up question from Anne. Does SiteAI also link the preprint with a final peer-reviewed paper? I'm afraid I don't know. I think Michael is looking at that and trying to answer it. So hopefully that might be taken care of by him. Another question from Leanne. One of the reasons for promoting preprints to early career researchers is that you can receive feedback, but it looks like very few preprints are commented on. Anybody?
I'm happy to start. Maybe Sumeet can add. Yeah, that's a valid question. There was I think there was an associated question about how many preprints get comments separately from these editor coordinated reviews. The data points I'm familiar with, I think I mentioned a paper from medRxiv, from actually the team behind medRxiv, and they said in the first year it was around 9%, so 9% of the preprints. And I think another study by Mario Maliki and some collaborators, which focus on bioRxiv, I think it was something around less than 10%. What I would nuance here is that the comments on the preprint itself are only those that are posted publicly, and not everyone is comfortable doing that or has the inclination to posting publicly. I personally think there are many benefits to posting publicly because they will benefit the authors, but also the readers, again, experts, non-experts. But we do know that a lot of the feedback is taking place via private channels, through direct messages on Twitter, email, the good old email. And actually the bioRxiv survey from 2019, where they did ask the bioRxiv users, this was one of the questions they asked, how did they get feedback? If I remember correctly, one of the top channels of feedback was through private email. So essentially, we do know that they encourage feedback from the communities. Is difficult to measure in a public way because, again, a lot of this happens behind the scenes, which is fine. I mean, there are many ways in which researchers interact with each other privately. But again, not all of the feedback is posted publicly, which explains that element, I would say.
Thanks, Iratxe. I hope that answers Leanne's question. Sandeep has asked, sorry, to add something to it, Sumeet.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing that with relation to comments, I think there is a bias because most of the time when you add comments, I think people think that they should be negative. And it's like if we want to make a collaboration or some sort of feedback, I would actually agree with Iratxe that most of the time it's by email. So, and publicly available comments are not favored in that way most of the time. Yeah,
that's a very good point. Thank you. So now to the question from Sandeep. What if someone uses your results from the preprint and submits the same to a peer-reviewed journal? Is it a possibility?
So I assume this relates to the possibility of scooping, essentially, that you're working on something similar, or actually that somebody may steal the results. There is quite a bit of concern about this, and it's something that we hear about often at ASAPbio. I would say that actually by having a preprint, you are giving yourself protection for this, because as we mentioned during the presentations, when you post a preprint, you have a dated record, permanent record with a DOI or another persistent identifier. So you will have a proof of your work by saying, essentially, here's the work, this is the author line, these were the contributors, etc., and this is when we disseminated it publicly. The other thing I would mention is that this can happen. I mean, I have heard of this also in the context of journal submissions, where different groups are competing, working on similar things by serendipity, and they happen to be trying to publish at the same time. But because all of that happens behind the scenes of the peer review process, I mean, for all the reasons that we understand how journals work, but it means that it is much trickier to establish who was working on what at what point. While with the preprint, you are ready to share it when you are ready to share it, and you will have your permanent record that shows what you are working on. So I would say that I understand the concerns about this, but in reality, it's actually a protection. And also, again, referring to the bioRxiv survey I mentioned earlier, the bioRxiv also also asked their users whether there had been, again, any issues around publication because they had posted a preprint, and I think it was under a very small proportion. 1% of them said that they may have had an issue. The rest said no problems. I hope that answers the question.
I would like to add just one comment. So as Iratxe mentioned, actually, for many journals, it acts as a protection because at least the policy at eLife and EMBL-Press is that they give you scoop protection from the day of submitting a preprint, not from the day of submission of manuscript to them. So for example, if you make a preprint and you go to some journal, things don't work out, and you submit to eLife or EMBL-Press, they're going to only consider papers that were published before the day of preprint being posted. So in that way, anything that's published after your preprint is posted, it's completely, you are protected from that. So I hope that more journals do it, but at least these two do offer concrete protection.
Thank you. We have another question. Is there a list of approved or recommended preprint websites which provide the feedback or review services that have been described?
So am I understanding this correctly? There is a list of, I guess, platforms or services that provide reviews on preprints, if I'm understanding this correctly. Let me know if I understood it incorrectly. One place I would suggest is the ASAPbio hosts a registry of peer review, what we call experiments or new initiatives called Reimagine Review. So after this one, I'll find the link and post it on the chat. And you can actually filter that. So it covers not only review initiatives on preprints, also from journals, etc., but you can actually filter the projects that relate to preprints only. So you will be able to see things like review commons and others that are focused on preprints. There are a number of other initiatives around that. Again, you may be familiar with this, but Peer Community In is a service where it's also free, and you can submit your preprint, so you have to submit it yourself, similar to Review Commons, but they will coordinate the review and give you reviews, and you can also then potentially go to a journal with your paper and reviews if you like. They will also post the reviews. That's one element that they cover. But I'll try to find this link to Reimagine Review and share it.
Sorry, Iratxe, are you looking for sharing something?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to post it on the chat, but let me know if I should say anything else.
Okay. Then, do you have anything to add, Sumeet?
No, I think that's perfect.
Thank you. So then let's take a question from Nick. it is relatively unusual to share data with a preprint rather than a final published journal article. Is that the case? And should we also encourage early data sharing? So I can share a little bit from the Europe PMC perspective, and that's mostly just what we actually see. And that is actually a large enough proportion of preprints do cite accessions. Now, many journals will ask you to deposit data prior to the review process so that reviewers can access it during the peer review itself. And so many databases also allow you to add data that is not necessarily at the final publication state. And so that does already happen in many scientific communities. There are also databases that provide a timely release, similar to an embargo and an open access publication. So essentially they will wait to make the data public until the final publication appears and they have permission from the author. But even in such cases, it's still very useful to have an accession number in the preprint, even if you can't yet see that data record. Later on, when somebody reads the preprint, they can review the data set behind it as well. Whether we should encourage early data sharing, well, as open data advocates, I would definitely say yes. But of course, there might be other limitations around it that differ from community to community. Do you have anything to add, Iratxe or Sumeet?
I guess the only thing I would mention is that, and maybe some of you are familiar, is that actually also in the context of trust around preprints and etc., the medRxiv, again, bearing in mind of the implications for public health, actually has a requirement for data availability disclosures, which probably goes beyond what many journals do. They encourage the authors to at least explain where the data would be available because they felt it was important for the evaluation of that type of paper.
Thank you. Sumeet, anything else from your side?
I mean, as both of you explained, I mean, the policy of preprint is not to have authors to have the big data publicly available, although it would be ideal that the authors do it. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope that answers next question. We also have a comment from Bruno who says that what happened to him twice is that journals will show interest for a manuscript after the seeing preprint out. Thank you for that shout out. I hope that helps some of the people on the call as well. Do we have any other questions that I failed to?
Maria, there was an earlier question about blind peer review that I thought it may be useful to mention briefly here. I know Sumeet provided some comments, which was fantastic. I thought it may be useful rather than me trying to type it. The short answer is that if you post a preprint, they do not allow posting it with a pseudonym. So you will be saying to the world, we are the authors who provided, essentially who produced this paper, etc. So it may undermine the submission to a journal where they will eventually plan to do blind peer review. So if that's what you're looking for, bear that in mind. I would, however, say a couple of things around double-blind peer review. One is that the expectation is that even if you were to do that, the expectation from the journal for the reviewers is that they don't try to go and do detective work to find out who the authors are, whether they do it or not. That depends on the individual, but that's the expectation, that the reviewer will evaluate what they are provided from the journal. And the other thing I would mention is that I understand that the rationale around biases in terms of carrying out double-blind peer review, but there have been studies also that have shown that it is possible for the reviewers to guess based on reference list and the type of research who the authors are. So I mean, it is not a problem specific to whether you will have a preprint or not. Even without having the preprint for your paper, there is a risk that would be compromised. So just something to bear in mind.
Thank you. Yes, if we don't have any other questions, we have run to the end of the webinar. I want to thank Iratxe and Sumeet once again for their lovely contribution. I thank you all for your attendance and for the lively discussion that we've had. I think the questions were really stimulating, and it was lovely to chat to all of you. If you still have any other questions, please remember that I think both Iratxe, Sumeet, and myself have shared contact details, and we're very happy to answer them post-webinar. webinar, and also you will receive a link to rate the stock. So please give us any feedback if you have. Thank you all once again, and we hope to see you at another event.